life is changing constantly, okay? And if you think, oh no, change is not possible, look at this. Me, little old me. I'm in a hotel room with a spiral staircase, okay? Um, Very exciting stuff. I've signed 2 NDAs, non-disclosure agreements, which makes me sound a little bit more fancy than I like to fancy myself. But I can't tell you why I'm here. All I'll tell you is that it is an unusual corporate engagement. But it's not it sounds as if I've had beverages tonight, which I might have had, but not enough to make me slur. I have become involved in a corporate engagement that is the reason that I am in a hotel room with a spiral staircase. And that's pretty much all I can say. The corporate engagement means that I am not in New York City. I'm in the West Coast, which means that it is not 3:03 a.m. as you East Coasters might think it is. For me, it's actually a very reasonable 12:03 a.m. Without further ado, here we go, the Power Broker. Let me just confess, I'm not excited about reading this right now, but I can't miss another day, all right? I owe it to myself, to all of you, to the podcast 99% Invisible, which is surely going to have an update. I need to Robert Caro, to the citizens of New York City whose ancestors and whose whose previous homeowners were displaced by the actions of Robert Moses. I owe it to you to read this tonight. So without further ado, The Power Broker, Robert Moses and the Fall of New York, specifically page 110. From the beautiful spiral staircase, 2-story hotel room of me, which honestly should disqualify me from, this just feels a little fancy. Perhaps you might think, oh no, this is too posh, this is too bourgeoisie, and she doesn't even know how to pronounce it. So actually, maybe I'm not too bourgeoisie, but I don't know. Being in such a fancy space makes me feel like maybe I shouldn't even be qualified to read a book about bringing power to the people. Anyway, I'm thinking too much. I think this is the problem. When I do these streams late at night and there aren't enough people to keep me in check, I start saying weird stuff. When there's real people here, I don't say as many weird things because I know that you're going to respond in the chat. Now you should just comment. You should be like, Annie, stop it with the commentary, specifically the weird commentary. Just stick to the book, which I will do starting now. Under this onslaught, the legislature reeled. Republican assemblymen and senators assured the public that they were interested in reorganization too, and introduced bills of their own which they said had the same objectives as the commission's. This put the battle on a technical level. Smith needed rapid analyses of the Republican bills to determine whether their sponsors' claims for them were true. Mrs. Moskowitz summoned Moses to Albany, and with Mary making sure he had the $5.42 for the fare in his pocket, he left the apartment at 6 a.m. to catch the early train to the Capitol. At first, Moses worked in a small office in the recesses of the Capitol, but as the legislative session moves toward a climax, he was called more and more frequently to the executive chamber. Having him at hand saved everybody time. If the governor and his advisors wanted to know how many jobs a proposed GOP bill would eliminate and whose jobs they were, or whether the wording of a bill conflicted with seemingly contradictory wording in the Constitution, or whether there was a precedent. I totally already read this. This is when I was by the pool, and I was like, oh, he's literally just like ChatGPT but human. It took me a minute to realize I had read that. Okay, for a while, dreams had seemed near to realization. Genuine accomplishment had seemed close. Moses had, after all, been the moving force in the drafting of a plan to remake the machinery by which more than 10 million people were governed, and he had watched the bills that embodied a substantial portion of that plan move tortuously, but steadily, along the road to reality. But without at least the 16 department constitutional amendment, the statutory changes were meaningless, and in 1921, Miller opposed the amendment's repassage, and the legislature never let it, or the executive budget and 4-year term proposals, out of commission. The Citizens Committee on Reorganization in the state government, with its extra office at the home of the secretary without expense to the committee, unquote, was disbanded. Sipping my canned still water. Not very eco-friendly of me to drink water out of aluminum cans, but it came with the hotel, and I'm just really curious. Curiosity killed the earth. To anyone who was, at the time, watching the career of the secretary, these developments must have seemed just another defeat in a life already crammed with defeats. In reality, however, something new had happened, something that would not only ensure that the Reconstruction Commission's proposals would eventually become law, but that would also change the shape of Bob Moses's life. Out of public office in 1921 and 22, Al Smith was back in New York, working as president of a large trucking company. The company's owners were Irishmen from the old neighborhood, men who were not only the friends of Al Smith's youth, but who, in his maturity, idolized him. Since his company's offices were on Canal Street, only 8 blocks from City Hall, a continual stream of city officials, men who had risen through the Tammany organization with Smith, walked the 8 blocks to drop in on the governor and to pass the time of day. The governor was in quotes because he has since been succeeded by Nathan, I believe, can't remember actually, Nathan something. Hoping that Smith would accord them the supreme honor, an invitation to walk home with him across the neighborhood to his apartment on Oliver Street, the company's owners and the city officials would often find excuses to hang around his office in the late afternoon. Moses, however, was working, for a new reform organization, the New York State Association, in a shabby cubicle at 305 Broadway, barely large enough for his desk and that of a part-time secretary. He was close to being out of even quasi-official touch with government. Occasionally, he would have lunch with one of the few people he knew in the City Hall area, former Bureau or Reconstruction Commission staffers like Ernie Will von Sader, who were now lower echelon city employees, but more often he had to eat alone. He had few visitors, but in the late afternoon, the phone would often ring. Moses would pick up the receiver. "Bob," Al Smith would rasp. "Bob, how about walking home with me?" Next paragraph. The two men made an odd pair as they walked through the winding, narrow streets of the Lower East Side in the twilight, one of them tall, slim, handsome, and aristocratic in bearing, the other short, pot-bellied, florid. The taller man, starting out with long, springing steps, continually had to shorten his stride to let the other, who walked with a slow, extremely pigeon-toed gait, catch up. How does Robert Caro know this? I know he wouldn't lie, but did he probably interviewed Al Smith. Should I check it? I'm already checking it. He has a thing in the back, if you haven't been paying attention. He has a few pages in the back where he keeps fastidious record of all of his interviews, which doesn't happen. I don't know if maybe you didn't know this, but this doesn't happen in every nonfiction book. Most nonfiction books don't really have this sort of record of all of the interviews. I'm going to see if there... Okay, so page 1171 is selected interviews. Let's see if there is a Smith, L. That would be interesting. There's not. Well, maybe somebody just somehow knew that Robert Moses had long steps that were longer than Al Smith's. Okay, anyway, I shouldn't get caught up in details like that. Okay, their progress was further slowed by Smith's popularity. He seemed to know almost every man and woman who passed, and when one of them stopped to chat, he would stop too and talk with him without appearance of impatience, while his companion would stride restlessly in little circles, or trying desperately to stand still and listen politely, would nervously clench and unclench his fists. But between the chats with passers-by, there was plenty of time for talking between Moses and Smith. And not all the talking was done by the former governor. In fact, as Twilight Walk succeeded Twilight Walk, more and more of it was done by Moses. The ideas on government, which he had poured forth for almost a decade, the theories, proposals, plans, advice, the dreams with which he had bored staffers at the Bureau of Municipal Research, examiners at the Municipal Civil Service Commission, borough presidents, park commissioners, and a legion of minor city officials, now were poured forth again. The late afternoon calls from Smith became more frequent. With regularity now, when the two men had arrived at the old red brick tenement in which the former governor lived, he would invite Moses up for dinner. And one day, Bob Moses barged into Ernie Will Von Sader's office. And he is a bureau staffer. He was striding fast, almost running, more excited than Ernie had ever seen him before. "Ernie," he said, Bob Moses said, quote, "Al Smith listens to me," unquote. Dun, dun, dun. And now we're at chapter 7, change in major, but I'm first having a big sip of my earth-killing aluminum can water. Men who saw in the bond between Robert Moses and Alfred Emanuel Smith a key to the shape in which the future of New York State and New York City unfolded, as well as to one of the great stories of American politics, never told in its full depth, the blood feud between Smith and Franklin D. Roosevelt, would wonder what had forged between the two men of independence and pride and ambition a tie so strong that, transcending independence and pride and ambition, it would be ended only by death. New paragraph. Certainly, there was nothing in the backgrounds of the two men to bring them close. The reason I made such a point of the punctuation was because my friend Austin said that when Robert Picaro, the author of this book, has a one-sentence paragraph, it's always like a big punch. And I noticed that there was like a normal-sized paragraph and then a one-sentence paragraph, so that's why I wanted to emphasize it. Anyway, Moses' youth was set against a backdrop of Lucerne and Elberon, broad elm trees and leafy arbors, red damask and paneled walls, and coffee streaming from a spout of silver into bright, fragile cups. Smith spent his youth in the Fourth Ward, a wilderness of tenements stretching away from the foot of the Brooklyn Bridge. His grandparents had come to earth in that ward for no better reason than that they happened to see a rooms to let sign hung out only a few blocks from the Beekman Street Pier, where they were deposited in 1841 by the Black Ball Line, along with a shipload of other ragged Westmeath Irish. And they were too hungry and too tired to walk further. They lived all the rest of their lives in the Fourth Ward. Al Smith's parents lived there too, and Al Smith, the former New York City governor, who was born over a barber shop at 174 South Street on December 30th, 1873, was to spend all his youth and young manhood in the shadow of the bridge, within an enclave its borders sharply defined on the south by Water Street, where the tenements were crammed with prostitutes, and on the west by the Bowery, which was lined with flop houses and saloons, held tenaciously by the ward's, quote, respectable Irish families. So sad to think about how expensive that real estate is now. Anyway, sorry I keep talking about that. Never leaving it for longer than a day's outing, he grew into the narrow compass of a neighborhood whose life revolted around two institutions: St. James Roman Catholic Church and downtown Tammany Club, and in which, as one who worked there put it, mortality was simple. Quote, virtue was virtue, vice was vice, unquote. And the views of the parents were the views of the children as to which was which. On summer evenings, the children would sit on the stoops of the tenements and talk until Father Keene rapped on the window of the St. James Parish house as a signal that it was time to go to bed. And they went, as their parents had gone when they were children, and Father Keene's predecessor, Father Farrelly, had rapped for them. Bob Moses was neither circumcised nor bar mitzvahed, but young Al Smith was a faithful St. James altar boy, awakening early on bleak, cold winter mornings, with his mother always up even earlier to prepare his breakfast, and trudging up Cherry Hill in the dark to serve at the 6 o'clock Mass. I'm a little stunned right now. I know that I don't need to give reactions. People have said generally positive things about me inserting my reactions. So that's why I'm doing this. But I was not making it a secret that I was getting a little bit fed up with all of the New York State politics from 100 years ago that I didn't quite understand. But this is like a really crazy, not even breath of fresh air. It's like somebody is like they're blowing freezing cold fresh air onto my face. Like suddenly we're getting the Bob Moses type in-depth biography treatment to Al Smith, who was simply the governor when Bob Moses got his start. It's pretty crazy. And yeah, people I know give Robert Caro a lot of glory for writing biographies in more depth and detail than anyone else. And Caro-esque is an adjective given to detailed nonfiction work. But yeah, I'm like, wow, this is kind of like after 7 hours of investment or something like that. I'm like a little bit blown away. At the age at which Bob Moses was being led on horseback along Dwight Street and taken for walks in Central Park, Al Smith was scampering along the hectic Lower East Side waterfront, playing hide and seek among the bales and crates that cluttered the East River piers, dangling daringly from the sailing ship's bowsprits that made a line of spears over the horse-drawn trucks, clattering along the cobblestones of South Street, playing tag. During an era in which the city didn't build playgrounds in slums, in narrow side streets, or in the wider cleared spaces alongside the big smelly fish market at the foot of Fulton Street, and tobogganing in winter down streets left uncleared of snow by a city that didn't bother to plow the slums. When he learned to swim, he learned in the river, with the spars of the sailing ships looming overhead and garbage floating on the water. Al Smith never went to Central Park. That was regarded by the neighborhood as a preserve for the wealthy, quote, uptowners, unquote, the Fourth Ward called them, who would send their Eton-collared children to its... Eton is in Britain. That's crazy that they were sending their kids all the way to the UK. Their Eton-collared children to its quiet glades with private tutors. His idea of an outing was the downtown Tammany Club's annual picnic, for which hundreds of sweating neighborhood families and cases of beer, candy, ears of corn, ice cream, and cheap toys were loaded into huge wagons for the 9-mile trip to Sulzer's Harlem River Park at 126th Street. At the age at which Bob Moses was being taught by private schools and private tutors, Al Smith was being taught by the good nuns of the St. James Parochial School and trying to avoid Father Keene's stern eye. And while Moses's tutors reported that he was brilliant, the nuns had a very different story to tell about the Smith boy. As one chronicler put it, quote, "The boy had no great fondness for books and showed no inclination to study. He never cared much for school. A passing mark was all he ever desired and all he ever achieved," unquote. And he didn't always achieve that. Al Smith had bright, cheerful eyes and an appealing smile, but there was only one characteristic that set him apart from his classmates: his unusually loud voice. It was no surprise to the nuns that he won medals in citywide parochial school public speaking contests. At the age of 13, he didn't have to worry about school anymore. Moses' father retired young, but Smith's, a large, powerful Civil War veteran of thundering voice, an inexhaustible supply of funny stories, and many friends, had to work too hard. Driving his own truck, loading and unloading heavy cargoes, he would come home no matter how cold the day, so wet with sweat that his first move would be to peel off his shirt and undershirt and plunge his face and arms into a tub of cold water to cool off. He worked 6 or 7 days a week, and often he got home so late that there would be days and nights on end when Al would not see his father, who liked to put his little boy on his knee during family excursions to the beer gardens along the Bowery, regale him with stories, and let him sneak sips of his beer. In 1885, the father's health broke, and unable any longer to do manual work, uneducated with no skills, he was forced to take work as a night watchman. One by one, he had to sell his horses and finally his truck, but the proceeds of the sales were soon eaten up by the doctor's bills and medicine. In November 1886, he died. All he left his son was his self-assurance. It was only through the charity of his friends that funeral expenses were paid. Al's mother was left almost penniless. Walking back from the funeral to the small flat, alone except for Al and his 10-year-old sister Mary, she muttered, half to herself, "I don't know where to turn." Mary heard her brother say, "I'm here. I can take care of you." At first, determined to keep her son in school, Al's mother refused to let him work. The very evening of the funeral, holding her children by the hand, she went to an umbrella factory and got a job that she could start the next morning. Rising before dawn to get breakfast for her children and prepare their lunches, Al's mother would work until dark at the factory and then come home to make supper and clean the flat. Since the salary she earned at the factory wasn't enough to support 3 persons, she asked for piecework that she could do at home, and when Al closed the door to his bedroom to go to sleep at night, he would see her bending over the work. A frail woman, within months her own health was affected, and she had to leave the factory. With the help of friends, she opened a tiny grocery and candy store in the basement of the building in which the Smiths lived. But it quickly became obvious that the store would never provide enough to support the family. She could get charity, she knew, but widows who were unable to support their children had the children taken away and placed in institutions. She had heard about the institutions. Anything was better than that. A few months after his 13th birthday, a month before he would have graduated from St. James, which only had 8 grades, Al Smith left school and went to work. This is crazy. A couple chapters ago, maybe it was last chapter, maybe it was the chapter before, this book really made it sound like Al Smith was like the stupid governor. And maybe he was, but suddenly we're seeing the reason that he didn't graduate from 8th grade. Before we didn't. And maybe I just assumed that he was stupid. First, he was a newsboy, then a chaser for a trucking firm, spending his days on the run, taking assignments for the firm's drivers from the main office and trying to find the drivers in the streets of the Lower East Side so that they would not have to waste time returning to the office. The job paid $3 a week. In the evenings, he tended counter at the little store while his mother rested. After 2 years, with income from the store dwindling and the family desperate, he became a shipping clerk for $8 a week. 2 years later, with the intake from the store down to almost nothing, he looked for another job and finally found one that would pay him $4 more. The job was at the Fulton Fish Market, also a place that's mentioned in Anthony Bourdain's book, which takes place a century later. Now you know. Kitchen Confidential. Al Smith rolled heavy barrels of fish in and out of the market, put the fish on ice, cleaned them, and wrapped them. He worked from 4 o'clock in the morning until 5 in the afternoon, except on Fridays. I'm taking a sip. On Friday, he started work at 3. Returning home at night, tired and dirty and reeking of fish, he scrubbed off the odor and went downstairs to the store. But in the 1890s, $12 a week was almost enough to support a mother and sister. He stayed at the market for 4 years. Then, to increase his pay to $15, he became a laborer, carrying heavy pipes at a pump works. It was not until 1896, when he was 22 years old, that he got his first political job. I am so thirsty. Moses and Smith came to public service not merely out of different backgrounds, but with different attitudes and for different reasons. Not even Al Smith's best friends ever said that he went into politics to help the lower classes. He went because, perhaps, he was gregarious, and politics for a young man in the Fourth Ward without connections was, in its early stages, mostly hanging out around the downtown Tammany Club or Tom Foley's saloon with other young men, drinking beer, singing around a piano, and telling stories while waiting for a contract from Foley. He went because, perhaps, it was the natural course for a young man with little education who wanted to get ahead in the ward's politics-drenched atmosphere. And because, perhaps, he saw no other way out of a life that, for most of the years he could remember, had been rolling heavy barrels and lifting heavy pipes. Moses prepared for his career by passing examinations and writing a thesis. Smith prepared for his by executing contracts. A contract to Tammany Hall was something to be done, an assurance to a local undertaker that Tammany would pay for a loyal Democrat's funeral, even if his family could not. A discreet visit to a brothel to warn of an upcoming police raid, or to police headquarters to ease business cramping parking restrictions in front of a liquor store belonging to a heavy campaign contributor, because it's not allowed. In the Fourth Ward, contracts were given out by Foley. We see again, pardon my French, who the frick is Tom Foley? We don't even know. He just really assumes we knew that. I don't really think I have the energy to look it up, but Tom Foley, that is one to circle. Tom Foley. Maybe everyone knows Tom Foley, and it's just me, and I'm like exposing myself as being totally dumb and ignorant right now. But I don't know who Tom Foley is. In the Fourth Ward, contracts were given out by Foley, one of the most remarkable of the Tammany district leaders who ran their districts and looked after the welfare of the straight ticket voting Democrats in them, as English squires looked after the welfare of their country villages. Quote, Big Tom Foley, I'm assuming, was a square-shaped, mustachioed, quiet man who spent most of each day at the downtown Tammany Club, listening to the cries for help. For a boy who had been arrested, for a process server who had been fired, for a policeman who had been shifted to a Staten Island beat, with unfailing patience. Although his saloons thrived, he was to die a poor man, their profits trickling, along with the payoffs and the campaign contributions, through his fingers and into those of his constituents. The only payout he ever asked for the favors he dispensed was a straight Democratic vote, and so heartily were his constituents willing to make this form of repayment that his district regularly rolled up Democratic majorities that made him the most powerful district leader in the city. Born to wealth that he believed would make him always independent, Moses felt no compulsion to turn associates into friends. Arrogance is, after all, one of the coefficients of money. Arrogance would have been an unaffordable luxury to Smith. The equations of politics, as he knew it, contaminated a factor of friendship that had at least as heavy a weight as the factor of respect. In the evenings after work, Smith began to hang around the saloons or the Tammany Club, hoping that Foley would give him a contract. And when he was given one, he executed it with graciousness and tact. Some of the historians who would later analyze his career would speculate that, as once put it, quote, he made an effort, he trained himself, to be more than ordinarily helpful and obliging, unquote. Friends would deny it, saying that there had been something in his nature that had made him, even as a young boy, friendly and eager to assist someone in trouble. Whether it was natural or cultivated, as Al Smith executed the contracts, he displayed a gift for getting along with people that was so highly developed as to be almost genius. Joining the St. James Players, who put on plays to support the parish's orphanage, studying acting from the cheapest seats in the high balconies at Broadway theaters, he became the parish's star villain, playing Corey Kinsella in Dion in Dion Bocalt's The Shaughraun. I'm sure that's a play. So enthusiastically he played the part that children began jokingly to hiss him when they saw him on the street. Everyone in the neighborhood seems to know the slim, clean-cut youth with the soft smile and the large, happy laugh. Everyone seemed to like him. Older men were watching him now. Father Keene liked to tell how Smith had tried to refuse to play any more villains. The hisses in the street were becoming louder, he had complained, and in the last production, when he had snarled at the girl who refused him, quote, you will be mine, unquote, the boos and catcalls from the gallery had annoyed him. He was going to be a hero or nothing next time, he had said. But all that had been necessary was for the father to call him in and say, Alfred, we have over 200 little girls in the orphanage, and it is getting harder every year to feed and clothe and care for these girls, unquote. And Alfred had said simply, give me the part. I don't really understand what's happening there. When touchy matters, such as visits by respectable parish girls to neighborhood saloons with their dates, had to be brought up with the young people, the father began to look to Smith to do it. Somehow, when Smith handled it, I guess if a respectable parish girl is going to a saloon, then she's a sinner because this is during the era when it's illegal to drink. It's prohibition times. Once again, I really do think that Robert Caro, even though he is a genius, could have told us that, or maybe made it a little bit more clear. Totally fine if I'm the only one that thinks that, though. Anyway, he either Father Keene or Al Smith had joined the Seymour Club, a social organization founded by a wealthy old grocer and Tammany financial backer named Henry Campbell. Campbell began looking to Smith, so I'm assuming Smith joined the Seymour Club. Campbell began looking to Smith to organize club excursions. Then he began inviting him home for Sunday dinners, and in 1896, when there became available a city job as a server of jury notices that paid $900 a year, huge upgrade from $15 a week. Well, no, it's not, actually. It's really not. Well, yes, it is. Sorry, it took me a long time to think about that. No, it's not. Campbell saw that Smith got it. So it's basically like a lateral move in terms of pay. But before he was a laborer carrying heavy pipes. And now he's making about that much doing jury notices, which is cool. I'm going to do one more very short paragraph. In 1900, after promising her parents that he would never become a professional actor, Smith married Catherine Katie Dunn, and the couple took a flat in the neighborhood. Smith's mother moving to Brooklyn to live with Mary and her husband. The children, there would be 5, came quickly, and Smith's devotion to his family became a joke, a fond joke among the people in the ward who saw him wheeling one child and holding the hand of another as he and Katie walked across the Brooklyn Bridge every Sunday after church, rain or shine, to visit his mother. But in the evenings after supper, Al Smith left his family and went down to the clubs and saloons. And now another man was watching the youth whom everyone liked, Tom Foley. Signing him up as a campaign speaker, Foley soon saw that even in this heartland of Irish platform eloquence, Smith was something special. And more important, he saw that Smith could be counted on. His praise of a Democratic candidate's personal qualifications was just as fervent when he knew the candidate or not. To the other adjectives with which men described Smith, Foley added one that, in the lexicon of the democracy of New York City, had a special significance. Smith was, he said, regular. In 1903, he offered him a nomination for state assemblyman, proving to be a remarkable campaigner, even though in Foley's district, remarkable campaigning was not a necessity for Democratic candidates. In November 1903, a month before his 30th birthday, Al Smith won his first election. Cool stuff. All right, well, that's day 14 of reading The Power Broker every day. I am ending at the top of page 118. Whatever 118 divided by 14 is, that's how many pages I'm averaging per day. And 118 divided by 14, that's 8.42. Really not that great, but oh well. Okay, goodbye. Good night.